Hello, my beautiful, wonderful children. Today we have one of the most requested versus videos for the whole channel. The Grand Mac Daddy, the big boy, the starter of modern fantasy, the Lord of the Rings, versus my personal baby, the one I'm the biggest fan of. It literally helped raise me as a child, The Wheel of Time. I know a lot of people accuse me of having blind spots towards The Wheel of Time. I'm aware of its flaws. I know it's not perfect, and I will be trying to be as objective as possible here. And don't worry, I love The Lord of the Rings too, a whole lot, more than I've represented here on this channel, because I think The Lord of the Rings has just been talked about to the point where I can't add much to the conversation. But let's go ahead and start comparing these two series. Two side notes. One, I will be keeping this video as spoiler-free as possible. I don't need to get into that many spoilers for a versus video, and I just don't want to alienate a bunch of people who haven't read The Wheel of Time. If you would like to buy the first books of either of these series, links for them down below, and I've added a new category for these versus videos: sales figures. I know that seems a little irrelevant when we're talking about which series is better, but it allows me to talk about their overall impact on the genre, and I think it's also just fairly interesting to see how different series have sold when compared to each other. Maybe not necessarily with these two, because I don't think there should be a surprise there, but down the road with more entries for this versus series, I think it'll be neat to see how different series have sold. But let's go over the categories we will be covering in this video right now. We have sales figures, plot, themes, magic system, world building, character, setting, and readability. Not necessarily in that order. But let's go ahead and kick it off with the first point: sales. It's hard to find exact numbers that are up to date for these because publishers surprisingly don't just put out, hey, we've sold this many up until August 8th, 2017, or whatever you want to look towards. But from what I can tell, the most up-to-date numbers is that The Lord of the Rings alone, without the addition of The Hobbit, has sold 150 million copies. That's a lot. If you add in The Hobbit, that's another 142 million. So yeah, Wheel of Time's impressive with roughly over 80 million sold, but clearly this point is going to go towards The Lord of the Rings. And no one's going to be surprised by this. The Lord of the Rings made a splash, which ripples are still being felt within the fantasy community, and probably will be until the sun explodes and we all die. The Wheel of Time is one of the top 10 best-selling fantasy series of all time, and it has its own splash as well. Its influence is felt, but with so much of that influence harkening back to the Lord of the Rings influence on the Wheel of Time, it kind of just becomes clear of how these sales figures stack up. So yes, first point, The Lord of the Rings. Next up we have plot. These two series have a very different approach when it comes to plot. The Wheel of Time is a plot-focused 14-book epic, while The Lord of the Rings sets up its plot in book 1, and then kind of just lets it ride out until the end with a couple twists and turns, but it doesn't necessarily stack up to what Robert Jordan's vision was for The Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan essentially took the plot from The Lord of the Rings, added it to The Wheel of Time into the first couple of books, and then expands on it from there for a total of 14 books that truly becomes one of the most intricate and well-realized plots the fantasy genre has seen. And this isn't meant to be a shot at The Lord of the Rings. The level of influence its plot had on The Wheel of Time actually almost convinced me to give this point to The Lord of the Rings. But with how much The Wheel of Time evolved from that plot and how much the plot actually affects the story versus Lord of the Rings kind of set up and then let ride out from there, I actually am leaning towards Wheel of Time for the plot point. And for anyone who's read the total, actually 15 if you include the prequel books, I think you'll end up agreeing, because yes, it does start with a very Lord of the Rings-like plot, but with the introduction of all these new characters with different motivations and all their different subplots adding together into what truly amalgamates to one of the most epic stories ever told, I think this one has to go towards the Wheel of Time. Now we're barreling down the pipeline and smashing through into theme. The Wheel of Time's theme is magnificent. I love its exploration of community, culture, family and friends. There's so many themes that are explored here. But unfortunately, the Lord of the Rings theme is something that I pretty much by default am going to give this point to, because I think the Lord of the Rings theming is some of the best literature has just ever seen, full stop. And while the Wheel of Times is utterly fantastic and certainly not worth shrugging at, the Lord of the Rings is going to take this just because it's the Lord of the Rings themes. Tolkien wrote this story in a post-World War I Europe where he saw the advancement of humankind and technology as this evil, horrific thing. He saw the older days as more pure. He wanted to resist the industrialization of the world he saw as resulting in some of the most horrific warfare the world had ever seen. Actually, no, it was World War I. It was the most horrific warfare up until that point the world had ever seen. And he explores these ideas brilliantly. If you have not reread The Lord of the Rings, specifically just looking for his theming and his exploration of these ideas, do so. There have been countless essays and papers written about this. All of them have interesting takeaways, and I truly believe, and I will stand by this, you can fight me about it, The Lord of the Rings has some of the best theming literature has ever seen. And on top of that, it does have a lot of the other themes Wheel of Time explores as well. Maybe not consistently always better than the Wheel of Time's exploration of those themes, but at least on par, and some of them better. Themes of friendship, Christ-like figures, a lot of pulling from our own world, war, immortality, greed, power, all these things are explored. Just, it's utterly brilliant. And the fact that he's able to do it so well in just 3 books, 4 if you include The Hobbit. Mwah. And now we're switching into magic system. And this is going to be a very controversial point, because when it comes to these 2 books, their magic systems rely on 2 entirely different sources. Lord of the Rings magic system is more legends and mythos based. It's about the creation of the world and how these different layers of creation eventually resulted in Middle-earth. While the Wheel of Times is much more in the page tangible. You have Saidin Sayadar, the World of Dreams, Wolf Brothers, all these things kind of stacking together to be a very tangible magic system. And it will come down to preference for which one you would give the point towards. I think they're both realized masterfully, and there's no right or wrong answer here. Tolkien crafted what is arguably still the greatest mythos for any fantasy series ever, and his magic system stems from that. While Robert Jordan crafted one of the most deep and nuanced direct magic systems that's in the page, I think, arguably, again, has ever been seen in fantasy. These are 2 heavyweight magic systems that both have incredible influence on the genre. I think Robert Jordan's influence is being felt more directly still now, but of course Tolkien's is just this over-present shadow that will be felt forever. But for my personal preference, I like more tangible, in-the-page magic systems that have more direct impact on every beat in the story. So for me, this point is going to go for the Wheel of Time. And this is your friendly reminder that this versus video is my take on these series, and it's meant to spark a conversation in the comments down below. So if you disagree with me, please tell me why. I'd love to hear your thoughts and takes on this versus video. Moving on to the next point. Now we have character, and this one I believe is more objectively one-sided. Lord of the Rings characters are fantastic, don't get me wrong, and many of the archetype characters that were set up there are still being felt today. We still have the Gandalf trope, the Aragorn trope, the Samwise companion being rehashed again and again, and several of those archetypes are explored in the Wheel of Time. But character is not just about the type of character you're using. It's about the realization of that character, their motivation, their agency, their development, and I think that is done leagues better within the Wheel of Time. There is character development in The Lord of the Rings. They have tragic characters like Boromir and heroic characters like Samwise, and they are developed expertly. But the Wheel of Time has so many more done just as well, if not better. As I continually come back to the Wheel of Time, I appreciate these characters more and more. And believe it or not, I have reread both of these series several times. And Robert Jordan's commitment to having each of his main characters go through an incredible development, from Egwene to Nynaeve to Mat to Perrin to Rand to Lan to Moraine, everyone here has their own motives, realizations, twists, turns, and final cathartic ending or tragic ending for us, the reader, to just dive into and explore again and again. I swear the number of times you can reread The Wheel of Time is equal to the number of characters that exist within the pages, because it seems like every time I come back to it, I appreciate another one of the characters to an even greater extent. And even when Robert Jordan did rehash some of the types of characters that Tolkien had set up, hence Moraine being a Gandalf trope, he added his own twist and spin and evolution in a way where I feel it's justified to say Robert Jordan brought those archetypes to a whole nother level fairly consistently. So for me, this point, I feel like it's got to go Wheel of Time. And right now, I'm getting like 5 all caps rage comments. And before you guys leave those, just because I'm giving this point to Wheel of Time, I still love the characters of Lord of the Rings, and trust me, a lot of the things you're about to say, I know and appreciate about those characters so much. But now let's transition from one controversial point to another. These, in my opinion, are the 2 best realized fantasy worlds ever. Full stop. Just done. There are worlds that are longer and bigger, but in terms of actually feeling like they are a location you can be dropped in to explore, I don't think either author has any other challenger in this category except each other. Wheel of Time's world is built through culture and character. Everyone is set in these cities or amongst these people that have these unique feels to them. And Jordan took from so many real world locations, blending cultures from Africa, India, America, Europe into these brand new creations that I love immensely. His crowning achievement, in my opinion, is still the Aiel. Their culture is better realized than 99.99999% of cultures ever written in fiction. But just because his world building is largely culture-based doesn't mean you can dismiss the other aspects of Jordan's world building as well. Magic systems, the actual physical locations, the geography, everything plays such an intense part with the characters and the plot. It just comes together in this magnificent blend. But in this competition, Wheel of Time is going up against Middle-earth. And in terms of lore, there is nothing on the level of Lord of the Rings, and how that lore slowly evolves and develops into the story we are told within the pages of Lord of the Rings. There is a Bible for Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, and it absolutely counts for this versus video. So which comes out on top? This incredible, intense lore with well-realized everything to the actual drawn out from Tolkien himself, layouts of cities, to Robert Jordan's commitment to cultural development and exploration of world from there. I can't declare a winner for this point. I know it feels like a bit of a cop-out, but these are so close and it's so personal preference driven, even more so than the magic systems. I feel this point cannot go to either one because I have seen countless arguments online for which world is better. And I've always just kind of end up going, oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. I can't decide. So this point is a draw. And now we have the setting, the point that's kind of a blending of everything before. How does all of this come together for the setting of the story we are told? Another hair split difference here in terms of who should get the point, but I am going to assign a point for this category. The Wheel of Time setting of this broken world with a magic system that is corrupted in such a vile way, and having a chosen one prophecy we are so uncertain of leading this story forward is so inherently engaging. I'm sure just from that pitch alone, someone could pick up the series. And then we compare that to Lord of the Rings, this setting where magic is dying. The age of men is rising, and that's not necessarily a good thing. We're seeing so much sadness in the pages, even as evil is being fought back against, destroyed. It's hard. It's a hair split difference. But for me, in terms of influence, in terms of what it is for fantasy as a whole, and just how many people are still trying to do it again, I feel like Lord of the Rings finally pulls out a victory point here because of its status within fantasy. The Lord of the Rings setting will be explored and debated again until the sun explodes and we're all dust. Now, when it comes to readability, this point is easy to debate either way again, and I feel like I've had too much sway here. So Maddie,
yeah,
which would you rather read? 14 books written that are like pretty modern language, easy to get through, or 3 books written in like old higher fantasy you definitely kind of have to adjust to get into the flow of?
Modern language for sure.
Even though it's 14 books?
Yeah.
What if I said it's 15 if you include a prequel?
Same.
Okay, well there you go. The readability point goes to the Wheel of Time. But that is my actual assignment of point here. Readability, I've actually heard more people complain about getting through Lord of the Rings than Wheel of Time. And 15 books, if you include the prequel, is a lot. There's no denying that. But once people kind of get into it, they seem to fly through. Unfortunately, I don't think this should be a thing, but a lot of people do put down Lord of the Rings now. And this is going to be a point that is highly split generationally, I believe. A lot of old heads can't believe that people consider the Wheel of Time to be more readable. But modern, younger readers, especially ones younger than myself, I've found, are very turned off by the way the Lord of the Rings is written itself. And I actually used to give this point the other way and talk about it in a, no, the Lord of the Rings is more readable, but I've had enough pushback from people online saying, I put down Lord of the Rings, or I'm going to give this one to Wheel of Time. Again, subjective video from me. I really feel the need to emphasize that for this one here today. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think of this versus video in the comments down below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know which video I should do next, which 2 series you want to see go head to head. I know which one won in the last video where I asked that question, but I need to put it off until the show comes out because, you know, good for channel, money. I need to eat. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.